I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories were just that, stories. But all that changed when I heard about the Ammons family and their home in Gary, Indiana. It was a case that defied explanation, one that drew the attention of everyone from local police to seasoned paranormal investigators. And it began with a seemingly ordinary move to a new house. The year was 2011. Latoya Ammons and her 3 children, fresh from a difficult period in their lives, moved into a small, unassuming rental house on Carolina Street. They were hoping for a fresh start, a chance to rebuild and find some peace. Little did they know, their new home harbored something dark, something malevolent. The first signs were subtle. Latoya noticed a strange, heavy atmosphere in the house, but she chalked it up to her own anxiety. Her children, however, were more sensitive to the unseen. They began to complain of cold spots and whisperings that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Still, Latoya dismissed these as childish fears. It wasn't long before things escalated. One night, as Latoya was tucking her youngest into bed, she felt a chill run down her spine. The room grew icy, and a foul stench permeated the air. Her son, eyes wide with terror, pointed to a dark corner. Latoya's heart pounded as she saw what looked like a shadowy figure standing there, its eyes glowing a deep, menacing red. In the days that followed, the house seemed to come alive with activity. Unseen hands yanked at hair, pushed the children downstairs, and slammed doors with a force that shook the entire building. Latoya's mother, Rosa, came to stay with them, hoping to bring some comfort and stability. But even Rosa, a woman of strong faith, could not deny the evil presence that seemed to lurk in every shadow. Desperation drove Latoya to seek help from anyone who would listen. She contacted local churches, hoping for an exorcism, but most were skeptical. The family turned to prayer and faith, hoping to ward off the sinister forces. But the more they prayed, the more violent the manifestations became. One night, in the midst of their turmoil, Latoya's youngest son was found unconscious, levitating above his bed. His siblings screamed as they watched him float, unresponsive, and then drop back onto the mattress with a thud. It was then that Latoya knew they were dealing with something beyond human comprehension. News of the family's plight soon spread, catching the attention of local authorities and the media. Skeptics and believers alike were drawn to the house, eager to uncover the truth. Among them was a local police officer, Austin, who had heard rumors but never witnessed anything like this. He agreed to spend a night in the house to see for himself. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the house, Austin settled into the living room, armed with a flashlight and a healthy dose of skepticism. Hours passed uneventfully, and he began to think it was all a hoax. But then, just after midnight, the temperature plummeted. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, and Austin's flashlight flickered and died. In the silence that followed, he heard the soft, sinister whispers. He turned to see shadows dancing along the walls, and a low growl emanated from the darkness. Austin's heart raced as he felt a force pin him to his chair. He struggled to breathe, his vision blurring. Just when he thought he would pass out, the grip released, and he fled the house, pale and shaken. What Austin experienced that night was enough to convince him, and many others, that the Ammons family was not imagining things. The house on Carolina Street was a gateway to something beyond our world, something evil. As more investigators arrived, the true nature of the horror would unfold, revealing secrets that no one could have anticipated. Word of the Ammons family's plight spread quickly, attracting attention from far and wide. Among those drawn to the house were Dr. Jeffrey Ona, a psychologist specializing in trauma, and Father Michael Maginot, a local priest experienced in handling exorcisms. Both were skeptical but curious, wanting to see for themselves what was truly happening in this seemingly ordinary home. Dr. Ona's approach was clinical. He interviewed Latoya and her children, carefully documenting their experiences. He noted the physical and emotional toll the house was taking on them: constant fear, night terrors, unexplained bruises, and scratches. Latoya described the oppressive feeling that never left, the sense that they were always being watched. Father Maginot, on the other hand, brought a different perspective. He arrived armed with holy water, crucifixes, and his unwavering faith. His first visit to the house was met with immediate resistance. The air grew thick, and an unseen force seemed to push against him as he entered. He began to pray, feeling the malevolent presence grow stronger, almost mocking his efforts. The investigators weren't alone. Paranormal experts, armed with cameras and recording devices, set up camp in the Ammons home. They captured chilling evidence, disembodied voices, shadowy figures, and objects moving on their own. The most terrifying footage showed Latoya's middle child being thrown across a room by an invisible force, his body contorting unnaturally. The climax of this investigation came when Father Maginot attempted a minor exorcism on Latoya's youngest son. The boy, who had been silent and withdrawn, suddenly lashed out with supernatural strength. It took several people to restrain him as he growled and spoke in a language none could understand. The room filled with an icy coldness, and a sinister voice echoed, "You can't save him." The authorities were now involved. Gary's Department of Child Services investigated, suspecting abuse or neglect. But their visits only confirmed the supernatural. A caseworker witnessed one of the children walking backward up a wall and across the ceiling. She fled the house in terror, reporting what she saw to her superiors. Despite the mounting evidence, there were still skeptics. Critics accused Latoya of fabricating the story for attention or financial gain. But those who spent time in the house, who experienced its horrors firsthand, were convinced otherwise. The caseworker's account led to the involvement of the police, who conducted their own investigation. Officers reported the same eerie occurrences, doors slamming, whispers in the dark, and the feeling of being watched by something unseen. With nowhere else to turn, Latoya and her family sought refuge in a church. Father Maginot continued his efforts, organizing a series of exorcisms to cleanse the house and free the family from the demonic hold. It was a grueling process, filled with moments of sheer terror and despair. Each session seemed to draw the entities out, but they fought back with a vengeance. Despite the relentless attacks, there were moments of hope. Latoya's children began to show signs of improvement, their spirits lifting as the exorcisms progressed. But the battle was far from over. The house itself seemed to resist, as if the very walls were alive with the dark energy that had taken root. As the investigation continued, more secrets about the house's past came to light. Former tenants spoke of similar experiences, of fleeing in the middle of the night, never to return. The land itself seemed cursed, with a history of violence and tragedy that stretched back decades. The deeper we delved, the more we realized that the demon house of Latoya Ammons was not just a haunted house. It was a battleground, a place where the forces of good and evil clashed, with the Ammons family caught in the middle. And as we prepared for the next phase of our investigation, we knew that the true horror was yet to be revealed. With every new piece of evidence, the story of the Ammons family and their house on Carolina Street became more disturbing. As we continued our investigation, it became clear that this was no ordinary haunting. The house had a dark history, one that seemed to feed the malevolent entities within. We dug into the archives, searching for any clues that might explain the intense paranormal activity. What we found was a pattern of tragedy and violence. The land the house stood on had once been the site of a brutal murder in the early 20th century. A family, much like the Ammons, had been slaughtered by an unknown assailant. The case was never solved, and the house that once stood there was torn down, replaced by the current structure in the 1970s. But the horrors didn't end there. Throughout the years, every family that lived in the house reported strange occurrences. Some spoke of a woman in white, drifting through the halls, weeping. Others told of a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. The stories varied, but one thing was clear: the house had always been a magnet for darkness. One of the most chilling discoveries was an old, hidden basement room that none of the previous owners had mentioned. It was found behind a wall in the basement, accessible only by a narrow, hidden staircase. The room was small and windowless, with strange symbols etched into the floor and walls. It felt like a place of ritual, a focal point for the dark energy that permeated the house. Father Maginot, upon seeing the room, immediately recognized the symbols as occult markings. He believed that the room had been used for dark rituals, perhaps even sacrifices, which had opened a doorway to the demonic realm. This, he theorized, was the source of the entities tormenting the Ammons family. Determined to cleanse the house, Father Maginot prepared for a full exorcism. This was no minor rite, it was a battle against powerful forces. He enlisted the help of several other priests, all experienced in dealing with demonic entities. Together, they planned a ritual that would seal the doorway and banish the spirits for good. The night of the exorcism was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The air in the house was thick with anticipation, a sense of dread hanging over us all. As the priests began their prayers, the house seemed to react violently. Doors slammed, windows shattered, and a deep, guttural growl echoed through the halls. Latoya and her children huddled together in the church, praying for the nightmare to end. Meanwhile, Father Maginot and his team fought to reclaim the house. The battle was intense, with the priests chanting and sprinkling holy water, while unseen forces lashed out at them. At the height of the ritual, the hidden room became a vortex of dark energy. The temperature dropped, and the air crackled with a malevolent force. Father Maginot stood at the center of the room, his voice steady and strong, commanding the entities to leave. For a moment, it seemed as if the darkness would win. But then, with a final, powerful exclamation, Father Maginot finished the exorcism. The room grew still, the oppressive energy lifting. It was as if a great weight had been removed, and a sense of peace slowly filled the house. The exorcism was a success, but the toll it took on everyone involved was immense. Latoya and her children, though free from the immediate threat, would never forget the horrors they had endured. The house, once a place of torment, was finally at peace. Or so we thought. As we left that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was not yet over. The house on Carolina Street had many secrets, and I feared that the darkness might one day return. For now, though, the Ammons family could finally breathe easy, knowing that they had survived the demon house. For a time, it seemed that the worst was behind them. The Ammons family began to rebuild their lives, finding solace in the quiet moments that had been so rare during their ordeal. The house on Carolina Street, once a prison of terror, stood silent and still. But the shadow of fear never fully lifted. Father Maginot continued to check on the family regularly, ensuring that the exorcism's effects were lasting. He blessed the house repeatedly, reinforcing the spiritual barriers he had erected. But despite his efforts, a sense of unease lingered. Latoya couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched, that something was waiting, biding its time. One night, as a storm raged outside, Latoya awoke to the sound of whispering. At first, she thought it was her children, but the voices were different, harsher, more insistent. She got up, her heart pounding, and followed the sound to the basement door. The whispering grew louder, more agitated, as she approached. Gathering her courage, Latoya opened the door. The basement was dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb at the bottom of the stairs. She could see the outline of the hidden room, the symbols faintly glowing in the dim light. The whispers turned into growls, and a cold breeze swept up the stairs, carrying with it the foul stench that had once filled the house. Latoya backed away, her instinct screaming at her to run. But before she could move, the door slammed shut, trapping her in the hallway. The growling grew louder, and she felt an invisible force push against her, pinning her to the wall. She struggled to breathe, her mind racing with prayers and pleas for help. Just as suddenly as it began, the pressure lifted, and Latoya collapsed to the floor. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of heavy rain pounding against the windows. She scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. She needed help, now. Father Maginot arrived within minutes, his face grim. He could feel the malevolent presence as soon as he stepped through the door. This was no residual energy, the entities had returned, stronger and angrier than before. He knew that the exorcism had not been enough. The dark forces were too deeply rooted, too powerful to be banished so easily. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. Latoya and her children were tormented by shadows and whispers, objects moving on their own, and the oppressive feeling of being watched. Even Rosa, who had once been a pillar of strength, was reduced to tears by the relentless onslaught. Father Maginot called in reinforcements. Paranormal experts from across the country arrived, bringing with them an arsenal of equipment and knowledge. They set up cameras, motion sensors, and recording devices throughout the house, determined to capture definitive proof of the supernatural. What they recorded was beyond chilling. Shadows moved independently of any light source, disembodied voices taunted and threatened, and the temperature fluctuated wildly. The hidden room in the basement became a focal point, with the symbols glowing and pulsing as if alive. The team decided to conduct a séance, hoping to communicate with the entities and understand what they wanted. Latoya, Rosa, and the children were sent to stay with relatives, away from the danger. As the investigators gathered around the table, candles flickering in the dim light, a sense of dread filled the air. The medium leading the séance called out to the spirits, asking them to reveal themselves. At first, there was only silence. Then, the temperature dropped, and a low growl rumbled through the room. The table shook, and the candles extinguished, plunging them into darkness. A voice, deep and guttural, spoke from the shadows. "You will never save them. They belong to us." The séance ended abruptly, with the team scrambling to regain their composure. It was clear that they were dealing with something far more powerful and dangerous than they had anticipated. The house on Carolina Street was not just haunted, it was a battleground for the souls of the living. As the team regrouped, Father Maginot knew that they had to take more drastic measures. The entities had to be confronted directly, their connection to the house severed once and for all. The battle was far from over, and the true horror of the demon house was yet to be revealed. The sense of impending doom weighed heavily on everyone involved. Latoya and her family were relocated to a safe house while Father Maginot and the paranormal experts prepared for the ultimate confrontation. This was their last chance to rid the house of its malevolent occupants once and for all. Father Maginot gathered his team, which now included seasoned exorcists and demonologists. They planned a multi-stage exorcism that would combine traditional rites with modern paranormal investigation techniques. Every corner of the house was to be blessed and sanctified, every symbol in the hidden room confronted and cleansed. The night of the exorcism arrived, and the team assembled in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Latoya and her family watched from a distance, their prayers mingling with the howling wind outside. Father Maginot led the team into the basement. The hidden room's symbols glowed faintly, a foreboding reminder of the dark rituals that had taken place there. He began to chant, his voice strong and unwavering, while the other priests joined in, their prayers filling the space with a powerful resonance. The temperature plummeted, and an oppressive force bore down on them. Shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, and the growling grew louder, more menacing. The priests continued their prayers, undeterred by the supernatural onslaught. They sprinkled holy water on the symbols, watching as the glowing markings flickered and dimmed. As the exorcism progressed, the house seemed to fight back with renewed vigor. Objects flew through the air, crashing against walls and shattering. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. But the priests held their ground, their voices rising in unison, pushing back against the malevolent force. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the room, and the ground shook violently. Father Maginot raised his crucifix, shouting a final command for the entities to leave. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The shadows froze, the growling ceased, and an eerie silence settled over the house. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the hidden room's symbols shattered, and the oppressive energy lifted. The house seemed to sigh, its dark grip finally broken. The team stood in stunned silence, the realization of their victory slowly sinking in. As they made their way back upstairs, the oppressive atmosphere had dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Latoya and her family returned cautiously, their eyes wide with hope and disbelief. For the first time in months, they could move through the house without fear. Father Maginot and his team conducted a final blessing, ensuring that every room was cleansed and sanctified. The house on Carolina Street, once a prison of torment, had been reclaimed. The battle was over, and the Ammons family could finally begin to heal. But as we packed up our equipment and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end. The demon house had many secrets, and while we had banished the darkness, I knew that the echoes of its past would linger. The Ammons family had survived a harrowing ordeal, but the memory of the horrors they faced would remain with them forever. As I looked back at the house one last time, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The battle was over, but the story of the demon house of Latoya Ammons would continue to haunt us all. Months passed, and life for the Ammons family slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Latoya found a new job, and her children began to smile and laugh again, the dark days of their torment fading into memory. Father Maginot continued to visit them, offering support and spiritual guidance. The house on Carolina Street, however, remained a topic of fascination and fear. Paranormal investigators and curious onlookers would occasionally drive by, some daring to take pictures from a distance. The new tenants, a quiet couple with no children, reported no disturbances, and the house seemed to sleep peacefully, its sinister history locked away. But one night, long after the exorcism, I received a call that would bring everything rushing back. It was Father Maginot. His voice was grave, and he asked me to meet him at the church immediately. When I arrived, I found him deep in prayer, the worry etched on his face telling me that something was terribly wrong. He told me that he had received a disturbing message. An old friend of his, a fellow priest, had visited the house recently, curious about its dark reputation. During his visit, he had experienced a terrifying vision. He saw the house engulfed in shadows, the symbols in the hidden room glowing once again, and a voice whispering, "We are not done." Father Maginot feared that the exorcism had not fully closed the doorway to the other side. The dark forces had been weakened, but not defeated. They were biding their time, waiting for an opportunity to return. He asked for my help in conducting one final investigation, to ensure that the house was truly cleansed. Reluctantly, I agreed. We assembled a small team of trusted investigators, and one evening, under the cover of darkness, we returned to the house on Carolina Street. The new tenants had graciously agreed to let us in, though they expressed no belief in the paranormal. As we entered, the air felt different, lighter, almost welcoming. But we knew better than to be fooled by appearances. We set up our equipment, focusing on the basement and the hidden room. As we descended the stairs, the sense of dread began to build, the familiar cold creeping into our bones. Father Maginot led us in prayer, his voice strong and confident. For hours, we waited, scanning the room for any signs of activity. Just as we began to think that the house was finally at peace, a chill swept through the room. The symbols on the floor flickered, their faint glow sending a shiver down my spine. We watched in horror as a shadowy figure materialized in the corner of the room, its eyes burning red. It spoke in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, "You cannot banish us. We are eternal." Father Maginot stepped forward, raising his crucifix. "In the name of the Lord, I command you to leave this place." The figure recoiled, but did not disappear. It seemed to struggle, as if caught between two worlds. The temperature dropped further, our breath visible in the icy air. We joined Father Maginot in prayer, our voices rising in unison against the darkness. Suddenly, a brilliant light filled the room, and the shadowy figure let out a scream that echoed through the house. The symbols on the floor shattered, the oppressive energy lifting in an instant. The figure dissipated, leaving behind a sense of profound peace. As we left the house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle had been long and grueling, but it was finally over. The demon house of Latoya Ammons was at peace, its dark history finally put to rest. In the weeks that followed, the house remained quiet, the new tenants living in harmony. Latoya and her family continued to heal, their lives no longer overshadowed by fear. Father Maginot and I kept in touch, knowing that while the battle was won, the war against darkness was never truly over. The story of the demon house would be told for generations, a cautionary tale of the unseen forces that lurk in the shadows. But for Latoya Ammons and her children, it was a story of survival, of faith, and of the enduring strength of the human spirit.